On the 26th of February 2013, 20 tourists gathered on an open patch of ground to the west of Luxor city in Egypt. It was early in the morning, barely yet light. They watched as a beautiful green and yellow hot air balloon was inflated, the canopy glowing from within as it took shape. Finally, when their ride was ready, the 20 tourists joined one pilot in the basket beneath. It creaked and rocked gently, straining at the ropes which held it to the ground. They were about to take off on an unforgettable sightseeing flight over Luxor and the Valley of the Kings. A flight which, ultimately, only 2 of them would survive. For many years, tourism has been an extremely important part of Egypt's economy. Since the 1950s, millions have visited the country each year, coming from destinations all over the world. They're drawn by the natural beauty of Egypt, as well as its many striking ancient monuments. Among them, the Sphinx and the pyramids of Giza. These are considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and are one of the main attractions for visitors to the country. Guests in Egypt can also enjoy many unique experiences designed to show them the country in a unique and special way. These include treks through the desert, cruises on the River Nile, guided tours of ancient sites, and hot air balloon rides over the Luxor Valley. Hot air balloon rides typically take place at dawn or dusk. Balloons depend on hot air to generate lift, and can be difficult to control during the daytime when the intense heat of the sun warms the balloon's envelope and creates thermal currents rising up from the ground below. Dawn flights will accommodate up to 30 tourists at a time, and usually last up to an hour. During this time, passengers will be able to take in some stunning vistas, and get an aerial view of a number of tombs, temples, and statues. Hot air balloons cannot be steered in the same way as many other aircraft. They go where they are moved by the wind, but skilled pilots can make reasonable predictions about flight paths based on weather conditions at the time of launch. They can also control the vertical height of the balloon, taking it higher by operating burners that heat the air inside the envelope and thus generate more lift, or letting out air through vents in the top of the envelope to reduce lift and make the balloon descend. In this way, though balloons cannot be steered, pilots are still able to exercise control over the general direction of the flight and their final landing position. On the 26th of February 2013, the hot air balloon company Sky Cruise launched a flight from an open patch of land to the west of Luxor city. On board the ultramagic N425 hot air balloon were 20 passengers and 1 pilot. They were assisted by a ground crew who would follow the balloon in road vehicles and meet it at its final landing point. The takeoff went smoothly, and the flight which followed, lasting 35 minutes, was a beautiful and serene experience. As the sun began to rise over the Valley of the Kings, the flight approached its natural endpoint. The pilot, 29-year-old Momen Murad, brought the balloon down towards a clear patch of land adjacent to some sugarcane fields, about 8 kilometers or 5 miles from where it had taken off. At around 7:40 a.m., the balloon was just about to touch down. The pilot threw out catch ropes and several of the waiting ground crew took hold of them, allowing them to guide the balloon in the final moments of its descent. At this point, the bottom of the balloon basket was approximately 2 meters, or 6.5 feet above the ground. All was well. Then, without warning, a blast of flame erupted from the gas cylinders in the center of the balloon. The pilot was standing directly adjacent to these and felt the flames burn his back. Automatically, he turned, and a jet of flame blasted him in the face. Disoriented, he lurched towards the powder fire extinguisher carried on board, but could not reach it. Badly burned, in extreme pain, and barely able to see or control himself, he lurched away from the flames and toppled over the edge of the balloon's basket, falling to the ground below. One of his passengers, a British tourist, jumped at almost the same time, landing with minor injuries on the ground. At this point, several critical things happened at once. The ground crew, shocked and distressed by the sight of the pilot falling to the ground with his clothes on fire, released the catch ropes and rushed to help him. At the same time, the balloon, now much lighter because 2 passengers had left the basket, lurched upwards into the air. As it did so, the jet of flame ignited the basket and began to rapidly spread. The spreading flames heated the air in the balloon's envelope. This, combined with the balloon's much lower weight, sent it rocketing into the sky. 1 more passenger jumped within seconds, falling from a height of 15 meters or 50 feet. He survived the fall, but died later in hospital of injuries sustained. The remaining passengers were now trapped in an impossible situation. With each second, the balloon soared higher into the sky, and with each second, the fire spread through the basket. As the uncontrolled ascent continued, 4 more passengers jumped or fell from the burning basket. None of them survived. The balloon, with the basket now almost entirely consumed by fire, rose to a height of around 300 meters, or 980 feet. At this point, one of the fuel canisters on board exploded. The basket separated from the envelope itself rapidly deflated, and the whole craft fell to the ground below, crashing down into a sugarcane field. A second gas canister exploded at the wreck site in the minutes after the crash. Thereafter, emergency responders arrived at the scene and found no survivors. In total, 19 of the 21 people on board the balloon flight died in the disaster, with the only 2 survivors being the pilot and the British tourist who had jumped from the basket at the same time as the pilot. Both survivors were injured. The pilot, 28-year-old Moman Murad, most seriously. He had suffered burns over approximately 70% of his body and required extensive hospital treatment. During this time, it was ordered that he be sent to prison pending further investigation, but his condition was so serious that he was never moved and remained in hospital. The British tourist, 49-year-old Michael Rennie, sustained minor burns and fall-related injuries, but made a full recovery. He was deeply affected by the accident, which took the life of his wife, 48-year-old Yvonne Rennie. He ultimately was released from hospital and returned to the UK alone, from what should have been the trip of a lifetime with his partner. An investigation into the accident was carried out by Egypt's Ministry of Civil Aviation. It was found that the balloon had been considered airworthy. It had been maintained to established standards. The pilot had been certified, and all relevant rules and regulations had been followed. The cause of the initial fire was most likely to have been a rubber fuel hose. This aging component had failed at a critical moment while the balloon was landing, releasing a spray of fuel into the air. This had ignited due to the heat of the nearby burners and become an uncontrolled jet of flame. The pilot had been criticized in the media for failing to shut fuel valves before jumping or falling from the basket, but the investigation did not assign him any blame. He had been almost fatally injured and entirely unable to do anything more than he had in the circumstances. No criminal charges were ultimately brought against him. The standards for hot air ballooning in Egypt were criticized. 2 years before the accident, in 2011, the country had undergone a chaotic and violent revolution. This revolution resulted in a huge amount of change and upheaval, and some media commentators believe that this had included the setting aside of some established safety legislation. Since the revolution, they claimed, the enforcement of rules and regulations had become seriously lax, as Egypt rushed to rebuild and re-establish itself as a tourist destination. In the light of this accident, rules around hot air ballooning were now tightened. The maintenance and inspection requirements for fuel hoses used on board hot air balloons were changed to be significantly more rigorous. Balloon companies were required to brief passengers on the risks involved in taking a flight, and guidance around landing large or high-capacity balloons was examined and revised. Hot air balloon flights were suspended across Egypt for almost a month, but the suspension could not continue indefinitely. Nearly 3,000 livelihoods depended on hot air ballooning, and tourism was an extremely important part of the country's economy. With enhanced safety procedures, ballooning resumed within weeks and continues to be a popular tourist activity to this day. The accident, which took place on the 26th of February 2013, represents the largest single loss of life in a balloon-related accident since the crash of the Hindenburg airship in 1937. With victims from all over the world, it made international news. The dead were almost all tourists, visiting Egypt on holiday. They had expected nothing more than a pleasant, peaceful ride above the Nile River and the Valley of the Kings. None of them were ready to face a choice about the manner of their death. None of them were ready to die.